My name's Harry, I'm 56 years old, and for the longest time, I thought I had a pretty normal relationship with my daughter, Emily. She's 23 now, smart, ambitious, and fiercely independent. I raised her mostly on my own after her mom passed when she was 10. Losing her mother was hard on both of us, but it made our bond stronger. We used to sit together at night watching old black and white films, talking about life, her dreams, and what kind of person she wanted to be. I always told her, don't let anyone make you smaller than you are. For years, I was the kind of dad who showed up quietly in the background, cheering her on at every milestone, never wanting to hover too much. I wanted her to find her own way. After she graduated from university, she moved out to live with some friends in the city, about an hour from me. We stayed in touch, but like most kids in their early 20s, her life got busy. Texts turned into occasional calls. Still, I never pushed. That's what love looks like sometimes, trusting the distance. Then one evening, she called out of the blue. Her voice was bright, excited. Dad, I want you to come to dinner this Friday. There's someone I really want you to meet. She sounded genuinely happy, the kind of happy that made me forget the silence between us. Someone? I asked, teasing. She laughed. Yeah, my boyfriend. His name's Kyle. The way she said it, like she was proud, made me smile. I'd heard the name once before in passing, but never got details. I was happy for her, so I agreed. I told her I'd drive up right after work, maybe bring a bottle of that wine she used to sneak a sip of during family dinners when she thought I wasn't looking. She laughed again. You better not embarrass me, Dad, she said. Embarrass you? I'm the most boring man alive, I replied. She snorted. You? Boring? Sure, Dad. That Friday, I left the office a bit early. The drive into the city was peaceful, though traffic picked up near downtown. I caught myself thinking about what kind of guy this Kyle might be. Emily had dated a few people before, but this was the first time she wanted me to meet someone officially. That meant something. I wanted to make a good impression. By the time I parked outside their apartment complex, the sun had dipped low, painting the buildings gold. I remember checking my reflection in the side mirror, straightening my collar, running a hand through my graying hair. A part of me felt nervous, the way fathers do when they realize their daughters are no longer little girls. Emily met me at the door with a big hug. Dad, you look nice, she said, genuinely smiling. That melted me right away. You look like your mom, I told her softly, and I saw her eyes flicker with that mix of warmth and nostalgia. Inside, the apartment was modern, open space, minimalist decor, and that faint smell of candles trying to cover up whatever they cooked earlier. At the dining table sat 4 people. Kyle, another guy about his age, a girl with long hair scrolling on her phone, and what I later found out was Kyle's mom. Emily introduced me around, her voice cheerful. Everyone, this is my dad, Harry. Kyle stood up, offering a handshake. Tall, athletic, the kind of guy who probably never had to work too hard to get attention. His smile was polite, but there was something about it, just a little too confident. Hey, Mr. Smith, he said, shaking my hand. Wow, Emily never mentioned how mature you look. It was meant to sound like a compliment, but the smirk that followed didn't match the words. His friend snickered under his breath. I brushed it off politely, assuming it was nervous humor. Good to meet you too, I said calmly. Dinner started off fine enough. We talked about small things, how they met, what they were both working on. Emily glowed when she talked about him, and that was enough to make me hold my tongue about the subtle arrogance in his tone. He liked to talk about himself a lot. The kind of guy who thought every story needed to end with him being the smartest person in the room. Still, I smiled, nodded, and tried to focus on my daughter's happiness. That's what parents do. But then, as the meal went on, the teasing started. It began harmlessly, I think. I made a light joke about not understanding half the tech jargon they were throwing around. Kyle laughed and said, Yeah, my dad's the same way. Old guys just can't keep up. His friend added, Hey, don't be too hard on him. He probably still uses one of those flip phones. Emily chuckled awkwardly, trying to steer the conversation elsewhere, but the tone had shifted. I could feel it, the undercurrent of disrespect, playful enough to sound like banter, but sharp enough to sting. I tried to laugh it off. Actually, I work in cybersecurity, I said evenly, just to keep things civil. So I keep up better than most. His mom gave a little, oh, surprised. Cybersecurity? That sounds serious. Kyle shrugged. Yeah, but that's all government desk stuff, right? Not real-world stuff like what we do. He glanced at his friend, both of them chuckling. That's when I noticed Emily fidgeting with her fork, avoiding my eyes. I've spent years in boardrooms filled with arrogant men. I know the tone of someone who's trying to put another person in their place. And I could tell. This wasn't about joking. It was about showing off. I let it slide again. I didn't want to ruin her evening. But then came the moment that shifted everything. I had stepped away to take a quick call. When I came back, the group was laughing loudly. As I approached the table, I caught the tail end of a sentence from Kyle, his voice just a little too smug. "He's just some washed-up old man," he said, grinning, right as I walked through the doorway. The table erupted in laughter. His friend slapped his arm, his mom giggled behind her napkin, and Emily froze. The kind of freeze that happens when you realize something ugly just crossed the line. My steps slowed, but I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, calm, expressionless. Years of working in security had taught me patience, even when anger simmered underneath. Kyle's smile lingered, though a bit nervous now that he realized I'd heard. "Dad, Emily began, but I held up my hand slightly, giving her a small smile to reassure her. "It's fine," I said quietly. The silence stretched for a beat too long before Kyle tried to cover it up. Come on, I was just kidding, man. You know, like old man jokes, right?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. I nodded, still calm. "Of course," I said, sitting back down. "I've been called worse." But his friend wasn't laughing anymore. He'd gone quiet, his phone still in his hand. He looked between Kyle and me, his brow furrowed. I noticed him type something quickly and then freeze when the screen loaded. His face went pale. He leaned in close to Kyle and whispered something, too low for anyone else to hear, but I saw Kyle's expression change instantly. His smirk vanished. His eyes darted to me, then to the phone, then back. "Wait," he said, his voice suddenly tight, almost shaky. "Wait, you're—" He didn't finish the sentence. The air in the room seemed to thicken, tension crawling across the table like static. Everyone looked confused, except for his friend, who now sat in awkward silence, eyes down. Emily looked between us, concerned. "What's going on?" she asked. Kyle swallowed, looking like someone had just told him a ghost was sitting across the table. That's when I knew this evening was about to take a very different turn. I didn't say a word yet. I just watched him struggle to compose himself, trying to decide if what he'd just learned was real. And the thing is, he was right to be nervous. Because there were things about me my daughter never really knew. Things I had chosen to keep quiet about for years. And by the look on his face, Kyle had just stumbled right into them. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I didn't say anything for a while. I just let the silence breathe. It's funny how quiet can be louder than yelling sometimes. The air felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for me to react, waiting for something to snap. But I didn't. Not yet. Kyle's face had drained of all color. He sat stiffly, phone in hand, his earlier arrogance dissolving like sugar in hot water. His mom looked confused. His friend shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us. Emily finally broke the silence. "Kyle, what's going on?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned the phone so only she could see the screen, whispering something. I couldn't make it out, but I saw her eyebrows lift slightly, her expression turning to a mix of surprise and disbelief. That can't be," she started, glancing at me. I gave her a small smile. "It's true," I said simply. Kyle's voice came out shaky. "You're that Harry Smith? The one who—" He trailed off again, clearly unsure if he should continue. I nodded slightly. "The one who helped shut down the Solvax breach," I said quietly. His mom blinked. "The what breach?" Kyle ran a hand through his hair, still staring at me like I'd just walked out of a classified file. "The Solvax case, Mom. The cyber terror thing from, 5 years ago. He was the lead consultant for the federal investigation. His name was everywhere in the tech world." His mom's mouth opened, then closed. The tension around the table shifted from laughter to unease in seconds. I didn't bring it up to impress anyone. I'd kept that part of my career quiet because it wasn't something I liked to brag about. I'd worked for years in national security before starting my own firm, and the media attention after that case wasn't something I enjoyed. I preferred peace, not headlines. But I could see now that Kyle suddenly realized he'd just called a man who testified before Congress a washed-up old man. "I didn't know, sir," he said quickly, voice trembling just enough to betray his discomfort. "I swear, I didn't." I cut him off with a calm tone. You didn't need to know. Basic respect doesn't require a resume. That shut him up. His friend gave a small nod of agreement, though he looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Emily looked mortified. Dad, I'm so sorry, she said softly. I forced a smile. It's all right, sweetheart. People say foolish things all the time. The important part is what they do afterward. I let that linger. Dinner after that was quiet. Awkward quiet. Forks clinking. No jokes. No laughter. Kyle barely looked at me. His mother tried to keep the small talk going, but her voice faltered every few sentences. I didn't stay long after dessert. When I stood to leave, Emily walked me to the door. She looked embarrassed, eyes glistening a bit. Dad, I didn't know they'd act like that. I'm so sorry. Kyle's not usually. Don't defend him, I said gently. He showed you who he is tonight. Believe him. She looked conflicted. Sometimes he tries too hard. He doesn't mean it like that. I smiled sadly. You don't have to explain him to me, but you should ask yourself why you feel the need to. She frowned, not answering. I kissed her on the forehead, told her I loved her, and left. That night, driving home through the city lights, I felt something heavy in my chest. Not anger, something deeper. Disappointment, maybe. Or worry. Because I knew that kind of man. The one who hides arrogance behind charm. Who mocks what he doesn't understand. I'd met too many of them in my line of work. And I'd seen what they could do to kind, empathetic people like my daughter. Weeks went by after that dinner. Emily called less often. I didn't press her about Kyle. I figured she'd sort it out herself. I've always believed you can't tell grown kids what to do. You just have to be there when they fall. Then, one afternoon, she called me out of nowhere. Hey, Dad, can you come to dinner again this Friday? Please. Her tone was off. Too casual. Too rehearsed. Sure, I said slowly. What's the occasion? Nothing big. Just want to have everyone together again. That didn't sound like her. But I agreed anyway. I wanted to see her. When I arrived that Friday, I immediately noticed the atmosphere was different. The apartment looked staged, like something out of a real estate ad. Fancy tables set up, soft jazz in the background, and Kyle greeting me with a smile so forced it looked painful. Mr. Smith, glad you could make it, he said, all cheerful. Please, come in. His mom was there again, but this time, she was dressed up. So was Kyle. Emily too. Something was off. Dinner started awkwardly again, but this time, Kyle was overly polite, like he'd read a manual on how to not sound like a jerk. He complimented my watch, asked about my work, even laughed at his own lame jokes before anyone else did. At first, I thought maybe he was genuinely trying to make things right. But halfway through the meal, it became clear what was happening. So, Harry, his mom said suddenly, swirling her wine. Emily tells us you've had quite the successful career. You must be doing very well for yourself. I gave a small shrug. I've done all right. Kyle leaned in. Just all right. I mean, come on, you've worked on high-profile stuff, right? Bet you've made a fortune from that firm of yours. His tone wasn't admiration, it was fishing. Emily looked uneasy. Kyle, he ignored her. I was just wondering, Mr. Smith, what's it like being retired now? Or semi-retired, I guess? You know, having all that money saved up and time to relax. I set my fork down slowly. I'm not retired. Oh, really? His eyebrows shot up. Wow, good for you. Most guys your age would have cashed out by now. My dad always says it's better to enjoy the money while you can. There it was again, that subtle jab, wrapped in a fake compliment. His mom chuckled softly, sipping her wine. Oh, he's just teasing, she said, though her tone didn't sound apologetic. Emily stared down at her plate, silent. Something inside me twisted. The same uneasy feeling from the first dinner crept back in, but this time it was worse. I could see what was happening. The over-politeness, the talk about money, the sudden charm, they were performing. For me, Kyle started asking about investments. Stocks, my company's valuation, things that weren't appropriate for dinner talk. I dodged politely, answering vaguely. But he kept pushing. At one point, he said, you know, Emily and I have been talking about starting our own business. Maybe an app or something. You probably have a ton of experience with startups. Maybe you could give us some advice, or even help us get started. Emily looked horrified. Kyle, he laughed nervously. I'm just saying, your dad's clearly got the experience and the capital. He could be, like, our first investor. I looked at him for a long moment, expression blank. Kyle, I said calmly, I don't invest in people I don't trust. He went quiet. The table froze again. His mom forced a chuckle. Oh, Harry, you're such a straight shooter. No wonder you made it big." But the mask had slipped. I saw it in Kyle's eyes, the irritation behind the smile. After that night, Emily barely called me. When I did reach her, she sounded distant. Different, like she was walking on eggshells around her own boyfriend. I didn't want to meddle, but something in my gut told me to pay attention. So I did, quietly. About a month later, I got an email, anonymous, no subject line. Inside was a screenshot of a message thread between Kyle and someone named Ryan. It was short, but clear. "Yeah, he's loaded. The old guy's firm is worth millions. Emily's got it made once she's married in." "You serious?" "Dead serious. She doesn't even know half of it." I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands didn't shake, but my jaw tightened. It wasn't the money that bothered me. It was what it said about him, about how little he respected her. I didn't confront Emily right away. I knew she wouldn't believe me. Not yet. So I waited. But as the weeks went on, her tone when she called me grew colder, more defensive. "Dad, Kyle's not like that," she'd say. "You just don't know him." Maybe not. But I knew his type. Then came the breaking point. Emily showed up at my house one weekend, teary-eyed and exhausted. "Dad, I need to talk to you," she said. She looked scared, really scared. I made her tea, sat with her, waited. And then she told me everything. How Kyle had taken control of her finances to help manage things. How he'd convinced her to co-sign on a lease for his new business venture. How her savings account had mysteriously drained thousands without her realizing. She'd finally caught him going through her laptop one night, transferring money from her account. When she confronted him, he'd yelled, blamed her for not trusting him, and stormed out. And the worst part? His mother defended him, told Emily she was overreacting, and that good men just handle things differently. That's when I felt it. Not anger. Something colder. Sharper. I put a hand on my daughter's shoulder and said quietly, "It's okay. You're safe now, but we're going to handle this properly." She looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. "What do you mean?" I gave her a small, calm smile. "I mean, he made a mistake. He underestimated who he was dealing with. And in that moment, I made a decision. Kyle had crossed a line, and he was about to learn what a washed-up old man could really do." The night Emily told me everything, she cried herself to sleep on my couch. I sat there in the living room long after she drifted off, the only sound being the slow hum of the heater and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I just stared at her, my little girl, grown now, but fragile in that moment in a way I hadn't seen since she was 10, and I had to tell her her mother wasn't coming home. The same protective instinct came rushing back, only stronger. I'd spent decades dealing with people like Kyle in my line of work, charming on the surface, rotten underneath. But this time, it wasn't a data breach or a cybercrime ring I had to dismantle. This time, it was personal. The next morning, Emily woke up puffy-eyed and quiet. She looked embarrassed, even though she had no reason to be. I made her breakfast, just toast and eggs, the same way I used to when she was in high school. "Dad," she said after a few bites, her voice small, "I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid," I said gently. "You're trusting, and that's a good thing. It just needs to be paired with discernment." She gave a weak laugh. "You always talk like you're writing a fortune cookie." I smiled faintly. "Maybe, but fortune cookies are usually right." We sat in silence for a while. I could tell she wanted to ask what came next, but she was scared of the answer. So I decided to give her something to hold on to first. "Here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "You're going to go back to your apartment today and pack whatever you need. You're not staying there another night." Her eyes widened. "But what about my stuff? The furniture, the deposit, everything." "Forget the furniture. I'll take care of the rest." "Dad, please don't make this worse," she said softly. "I just want it to be over." "It's not about revenge," I told her. "It's about reclaiming what's yours. You worked hard for that money. He took advantage of that trust. You don't get to just let it go." Her lips trembled. "I don't know if I can deal with seeing him again." "Then you won't have to." She looked up at me, confused, but I didn't elaborate. Not yet. That day, while she went to stay at her friend's place, I got to work. Years of cybersecurity consulting had taught me how to navigate systems quietly, efficiently, and above all, legally. I had every record, every transaction, every timestamp of what Kyle had done. He wasn't just manipulative, he was reckless. Transferring money between accounts left a trail, and trails were what I specialized in. It didn't take long to uncover the full scope. He'd used Emily's credentials to open a joint business account, then funneled her savings into an LLC that didn't exist beyond a flashy logo and some Instagram posts. He'd taken nearly $42,000. But here's what made my stomach twist. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the audacity. He'd actually texted a friend bragging about it. "She's too emotional to handle finances anyway. I'm just managing it better." Reading that made something in me harden. I'd seen arrogance in criminals before, but never aimed this close to home. Still, before anything else, I had to get my daughter back on her feet. Over the next few weeks, I helped Emily move into a small apartment closer to my neighborhood. I paid the first few months' rent, even though she protested. "You don't owe me this," she said, folding her arms stubbornly. "I don't," I replied. "But I owe your mother the promise that I'd always take care of you." That shut her up, though she gave me a small smile. But even after the move, she wasn't herself. She was quieter, withdrawn. I could tell she was carrying more than just heartbreak. She was carrying shame. It's something I've seen too many times in good people who've been manipulated. They think it's their fault for not seeing it sooner. One evening, a few weeks later, she showed up at my house with her laptop. "Dad," she said, hesitating at the door. "I got an email from Kyle." I gestured for her to sit. "What does it say?" She opened the laptop and read it aloud. "Emily, I know you're mad, but you're overreacting. I was just trying to help us build something. You're letting your dad control you again. He's always had you on a leash. You need to think for yourself." She looked up, her hands trembling. "Why would he say that?" I sighed. "Because people like him can't take accountability. They have to shift the blame to survive." She stared at the screen, tears brimming. "He used to tell me I was strong, that I made him better." I reached over and gently closed the laptop. "And now you get to make yourself better? Without him." That night was hard. She cried again, quietly, this time, but she didn't fall apart. She was processing, healing. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of the old Emily, the one who used to laugh loudly and believe the world was full of good people. I knew she'd be okay eventually, but I also knew we weren't done yet, because Kyle wasn't going to stop. Over the next month, he tried reaching out multiple times, texts, calls, even flowers left at her door. When she blocked his number, he started contacting her friends, spinning stories about how I was manipulating her for money. I kept my cool, but inside, I was quietly building something, a case. And during that time, something unexpected happened. I started changing too. See, I'd been living a pretty isolated life for years. Work, home, repeat. After losing my wife, I'd thrown myself into projects to avoid the silence. But helping Emily rebuild forced me to re-engage. With her, with myself, with the parts of me I'd buried under logic and schedules. I started taking mornings off to cook breakfast for her when she stayed over. We'd talk about normal things again, her job, her friends, what she wanted to do next. She'd started sketching again, something she hadn't done since college. I bought her a new art tablet for her birthday, and she cried when she opened it. "You always do this," she said. "You make it too hard to stay sad." I smiled. That's the plan. Meanwhile, I'd been laying quiet traps. Through a few discreet connections, I had access to enough evidence to show that Kyle had committed multiple financial violations, identity misuse, fraudulent transfers, unauthorized access to personal accounts. I wasn't going to ruin him yet, but I wanted the leverage ready. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. But while I was preparing quietly, life kept moving. And for the first time in years, I found myself lighter. I started jogging again in the mornings. Signed up for a woodworking class in town. It felt strange, almost guilty, to find peace while chaos still hovered in the background. But I knew I had to. If I didn't heal, how could I help her heal? One evening after class, Emily came by with takeout. She looked different, calmer. "I applied for a new job," she said proudly. "Marketing coordinator at that firm downtown." "That's great," I said, genuinely smiling. "How'd you hear about it?" "One of Mom's old friends recommended me. Said she remembered how creative I was as a kid." That made my chest tighten a bit. "Your mom would have been proud," I said softly. We spent that evening laughing, eating, watching an old movie. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was okay again. But that peace didn't last long. 2 days later, she called me in a panic. "Dad, you won't believe this. Kyle showed up at my office." My grip tightened on the phone. "Did he do anything?" "No," just waited in the lobby. Said he wanted to talk. Security escorted him out, but he was angry. Really angry. I stayed silent for a moment. Then I said, "All right. No more warnings." That night, I sat at my desk, the room dim except for the glow of the monitor. I opened the folder I'd been compiling, the one labeled Simply K. Inside were digital records, screenshots, emails, account traces. Everything I needed. I didn't plan to destroy him recklessly. That's not how I operate. No, this needed precision. I contacted a few old colleagues, people who owed me favors. Within days, doors began to open. Quietly, discreetly. But before I made a move, something happened that almost broke me. One morning, I found Emily sitting on my porch, holding an envelope. "He sent this," she said quietly. Inside was a printed note. "You ruined everything. She'll come back when she realizes who's really controlling her." I looked at her and saw fear in her eyes, but also exhaustion. "Dad, I don't want to live like this. I just want to move on." I nodded. "You will. But first, I need to end this properly." She looked hesitant. "What are you going to do?" I gave a small, tired smile. "Something he won't see coming." And as I watched her drive away that evening, I realized something. For years, I'd been protecting her from the world, fixing everything before it broke. But now, I wasn't just protecting her. I was teaching her what real strength looks like. Because sometimes, the rise doesn't come from vengeance. It comes from rebuilding what they tried to destroy, and doing it quietly, patiently, until they realize you never needed them to begin with. Still, I knew I couldn't let Kyle walk away untouched. Not after what he'd done. And when I finally found out what he was planning next, a new scheme, one that would hurt more than just my daughter, I knew the time for patience was over. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My mind had been replaying that letter all night. The smug tone, the manipulative phrasing. "She'll come back when she realizes who's really controlling her." Those words weren't just cruel, they were revealing. They told me one crucial thing. Kyle hadn't let go. He still believed he had power, and that meant he'd make another move. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, watching the steam twist in the morning light, and started writing out what I already knew: facts, accounts, connections. Every little detail about Kyle, his mother, and that fake business. Years of dealing with high-level investigations had taught me that revenge wasn't about emotion. It was about timing. The plan wasn't just to destroy him. It was to let him walk straight into his own trap. But to do that, I needed to know exactly what he was up to now. So, I called in a favor from an old friend named Marcus, former investigator, sharp as a knife, and someone I trusted with my life. He owed me from a job years back that kept him from losing his license. When I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "Send me his full name, date of birth if you have it, and the LLC he registered," Marcus said. "Done. What do you expect to find?" I asked. "Patterns. People like this always use the same setup for their next scam. They can't help themselves." Within a day, Marcus had results. And they were worse than I thought. Kyle had started another business, this time with two new partners, both recent graduates with clean records and no idea who they were working with. He'd used one of their names to open a bank account for investment purposes and was already soliciting money from small investors online. His pitch? A fake tech startup promising innovative encryption software. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly when I read that. He was trying to sell cybersecurity to strangers. Marcus sent over a message. "This guy's sloppy. You could take him down with a well-timed audit and one tip-off to the feds. But I'm guessing you want to make it personal." He wasn't wrong. I wanted Kyle to feel it, to understand exactly who he'd crossed. So I started assembling my own web. First, I reached out to an acquaintance named Claire, an accountant I'd worked with before who specialized in forensic audits. Sharp, discreet, and fiercely loyal when it came to rooting out fraud. I told her the situation without revealing Emily's involvement. She agreed to look into Kyle's company. Within a few days, she found glaring inconsistencies in his filings. Fake invoices, duplicate vendor entries, altered timestamps. Classic amateur moves. Then came phase 2, information control. Through another contact, I arranged to have a quiet article drafted on a local tech blog about emerging startup scams targeting investors. It didn't name Kyle directly, yet, but it mentioned a business strikingly similar to his. The point wasn't exposure, it was fear. Fear made people sloppy. Meanwhile, I kept checking in on Emily. She didn't know the details of what I was doing, and I wanted it that way. She was rebuilding her life, starting her new job, even talking about signing up for night classes in design. I wasn't going to drag her back into this darkness unless I had to. But one evening, she brought up something that caught me off guard. "Dad," she said, sitting on the porch swing. I ran into Kyle's mom at the grocery store. I froze mid-sip of my tea. What did she say? Emily gave a small, humorless laugh. She told me I should be ashamed for turning on such a good man. Said Kyle was heartbroken, that I'd ruined his career. I clenched my jaw. "And what did you say?" I told her I hoped she'd raised him better than that. That made me smile. Small, but real. "Good," I said. But her story gave me an idea. If his mother was defending him this aggressively, then she was probably helping him too, financially or logistically. And if she was tied to his business, that opened another angle. I spent the next few days researching her name, and sure enough, there it was. Her signature on one of the LLC's early documents as a silent investor. She wasn't just protecting her son out of love. She had a stake in the game. Now, the setup was almost complete. I gathered everything: emails, bank transfers, incorporation documents, communications with investors, and compiled it into a single secure file. I encrypted it, just like old times, labeling it Project Glass. Because that's what it was, a reflection. Everything Kyle had done mirrored back at him. But I wasn't ready to unleash it yet. I wanted him to hang himself first. To do that, I needed him to believe I was gone from the picture. So I made myself scarce. Stopped showing up in the usual circles. Stopped posting on LinkedIn or checking in with old clients. I even took a brief vacation, a public one. A week at a cabin by the lake, complete with photos Emily posted on her social media. And right on cue, while I was away, Kyle started getting bold again. Marcus texted me an update. "Your boy's pitching investors again. He's saying he's got backing from a federal cybersecurity advisor." Guess who that's supposed to be? I exhaled slowly. So now he was using my name. That was the final piece I needed. The impersonation turned it from fraud into identity misuse, something with much heavier consequences. I called Claire that night. "How fast can you put together a preliminary report showing financial misrepresentation and identity abuse?" 48 hours, she said without hesitation. Then I called Marcus. "When she's done, send the file to your old contact at the bureau." Quietly. No official statement yet. I just want him watched. "You're not reporting it yourself?" "Not yet," I said. "First, I want him to know I know." So I wrote him an email. Short. Simple. "Kyle, I hear you've been busy. You might want to review your filings before others do. Transparency is important in business, after all. Regards, Harry Smith." He didn't reply, but I didn't expect him to. Instead, that night around 10:30 p.m., my security camera app pinged an alert. Movement near my house. When I checked the feed, there he was, Kyle, standing at the edge of my driveway, hands in his pockets, staring at the house like he was trying to work up the courage to knock. I didn't go outside. I just watched. After a minute, he turned and walked away. The next day, I received an email from him. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you've got it wrong. You can't scare me with this act. You're just a lonely old man who can't stand that his daughter moved on." I could almost hear the tremor behind the bravado. He was bluffing, but afraid. Perfect. That same week, the tech blog article I'd arranged got traction. It spread across local investor circles, sparking suspicion about fake encryption startups. His inbox started filling with nervous messages from partners and potential investors, questioning the legitimacy of his company. One even posted on LinkedIn asking for clarification publicly. The cracks were widening. Then came the real twist. Claire called me one evening, voice urgent. "Harry, you're going to want to see this. Your friend Kyle isn't just running a scam. He's using stolen code." "What do you mean?" "He copied chunks of proprietary code from a small security firm in San Diego. Word's getting around. If that company finds out, he's done." I smiled faintly. "Let's make sure they find out." I spent that night preparing the final move. Everything I'd gathered, the bank data, the code theft evidence, the falsified identity, went into a neatly packaged report. But before sending it anywhere, I did something I hadn't done in years. I printed one physical copy. I put it in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote one line on the front. "The price of arrogance." That was for him. But I wasn't going to deliver it yet. I needed one more piece of confirmation. So, I arranged a meeting, through mutual acquaintances, at a networking event downtown. I knew Kyle would be there, desperate to save his startup's image. He loved being seen, loved playing the role of the confident young CEO. And when he walked into that crowded room, shaking hands, pretending everything was fine, I was already waiting in the corner. Calm, patient, watching. I didn't approach him right away. I let him see me first. The look on his face when he did was worth every second of restraint. His smile faltered, his handshake with some investor froze midair. I just gave him a polite nod from across the room, small, almost friendly. Then I turned and walked away. He didn't know it yet, but that moment would mark the beginning of his end. Because by the time he got home that night, the report would already be in the hands of the people who could dismantle everything he'd built. And when that happened, I'd be there, not out of anger, but out of quiet satisfaction. Because for the first time, Kyle was finally stepping into a world I understood better than anyone. A world where every lie leaves a trace. By the time I left that networking event, everything was already in motion. I didn't need to say a word to anyone. I'd learned long ago that power wasn't loud. It was quiet, strategic. It moved like water, slowly, steadily, reshaping the terrain until the landscape itself changed. When I got home that night, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into a sea of orange and gold. I wasn't celebrating. I was just letting go, because I knew what was coming next, and there was no turning back from it. 3 days later, it started. Claire called first. "You'll want to sit down for this," she said. The company Kyle copied code from? They filed a formal complaint with the state's cybersecurity division. Someone tipped them off. I smiled faintly. How unfortunate for him. Unfortunate doesn't begin to cover it, she said. The firm's legal team has evidence of file transfers traced directly to his registered business IP. He can't talk his way out of that. He's done. She wasn't exaggerating. Within 24 hours, the complaint had escalated to a criminal investigation. The Bureau, the same agency I'd once advised, took interest after discovering his startup had accepted money from at least 6 private investors under false pretenses. The moment they realized one of those investors was his mother, it got even uglier. By the end of the week, the fake business account was frozen. The website went offline. His partners, the 2 naive graduates he'd roped in, turned on him instantly, handing over every document and email they had. It didn't take long before Kyle was cornered. But I wasn't satisfied yet. See, exposure alone wasn't the lesson. People like him don't change when they're embarrassed. They change when they lose control. So I made sure to tighten every thread around him, until all the lies he'd built began to choke him from every direction. Marcus helped leak the Bureau's preliminary investigation notice to a few local journalists under the condition of anonymity. The headlines popped up quietly at first, small tech blogs, then mid-tier news outlets. Rising startup under investigation for fraud and code theft, local entrepreneur accused of misusing investor funds. They didn't name him at first. But the photos in the articles, the office space, the fake logo, even one of the company mixers, were all unmistakably his. Within 48 hours, the story hit LinkedIn, then Reddit, then Twitter, and that's when the mask finally broke. Emily called me in the middle of the night, her voice shaking. "Dad, have you seen this?" "I have," I said simply. She hesitated. "Did you?" I took a slow breath. I made sure the truth came out. Nothing more. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "He deserves it." I could hear something in her voice, not vindictiveness, but closure. The kind you only get when you realize the person who hurt you is finally facing consequences. By the next morning, Kyle's phone number was disconnected. His social media accounts disappeared. His mother, however, was still active, though she shouldn't have been. She'd been posting long, rambling defenses online, claiming her son was being targeted and set up. Unfortunately for her, the investigators didn't share that opinion. The following week, I got confirmation that both of them, Kyle and his mother, had been subpoenaed. They'd used investor money to pay off personal debts, and that alone was enough to ensure prosecution. The irony? I didn't even have to testify. My work was done before the first court date was ever scheduled. Still, part of me wondered how Emily would process it all. She'd kept her distance from the news cycle, focusing on work and art again. But one evening, she showed up at my house holding a small canvas she'd painted, a simple abstract piece in shades of dark blue and white. "It's not great," she said, smiling awkwardly. but I wanted to thank you. I looked at it carefully. The painting was calm, peaceful, with faint streaks of gold running through the middle. It's beautiful, I said. It's called After the Storm, she said quietly. That name hit harder than I expected, because that's exactly what life felt like now, the silence after chaos. The clean air after everything rotten had been torn away. We didn't talk about Kyle much after that, but I still followed the case quietly. He'd try to make a deal, claiming he didn't know his mother had used investor funds for personal expenses. She, in turn, blamed everything on him. The judge saw through both of them. The final verdict came 6 months later. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, code theft, identity misuse. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with probation after. His mother received a suspended sentence and community service for her part as an accomplice. I didn't attend the trial, but I heard from Marcus that Kyle looked pale and hollow in court, the arrogance gone. No smirk, no jokes, just silence. Funny, Marcus told me afterward. When they read your name in the evidence list, he just stared straight ahead, didn't even blink. I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say. Instead, I focused on what mattered. Emily had started doing freelance design work, saving money, even talking about traveling for the first time since everything happened. She was healing in ways I hadn't seen in years, not just from Kyle, but from the quiet damage of grief that had followed us since her mother passed. And I was healing too. For the first time, I'd stopped thinking about what I'd lost and started appreciating what I still had. I began teaching part-time at a community college, cybersecurity basics for small business owners. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. I liked the simplicity of it. No politics, no stress, just people who wanted to learn. Every once in a while, I'd get an email from someone asking if I'd ever consider writing a book about my past cases. I'd always reply the same way. Some stories are better lived quietly. But deep down, I knew this one, the story of Kyle, of Emily, of everything that happened, was the one I'd remember longest. Because it reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, that intelligence isn't just about solving problems. It's about knowing when to act and when to walk away. A few months later, I ran into one of Kyle's old business partners at a tech conference. He looked nervous when he recognized me, but I smiled and shook his hand anyway. "Don't worry," I said. "You were smart enough to step away. Learn from it and move on." He nodded quickly. "I will, sir. I really will." As I walked away, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Genuine, quiet peace. One last ripple of this story came a year later. I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. It was Kyle's. The note was short. "You ruined me. But you were right. I was arrogant. Maybe I needed to lose everything to see it. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope she's happy." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and burned it in the fireplace. Not out of hatred, but because that chapter didn't deserve to live in my house anymore. That night, I sat on the porch watching the sun sink low, the sky bleeding into colors of orange and violet. Emily called me right around then, her voice bright. "Dad, guess what? I got promoted." I laughed. "Already? You're supposed to make the rest of us look bad slower than that." She giggled. "You taught me well." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, listening to the cicadas in the trees and the distant hum of the town settling into dusk. I thought about how far we'd come. From that humiliating dinner table where I was mocked and underestimated, to this quiet evening where my daughter was free, confident, and whole again. Revenge had never really been the goal. It was justice, calm, deliberate, inevitable justice. And when it finally came, it didn't roar. It whispered. Because that's how the truth works. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just waits, patiently, until the noise fades. And when it does, all that's left is what was real all along. The storm passes, the water clears, and the reflection remains.